So there's no money coming to BSI to make sure that we comply with RED. Is that what we're saying?
I thought, though, that this is the general question. I tried to sneak out on that. You make me a bit nervous sitting here next to me. No, I mean, the incentive is clearly... the incentive.
That's fine. No, it's okay. All right, second question.
Thank you. The incentive is clearly to limit the administrative burden and, of course, to use the... Well, I mean, there's probably ideologic, but to use the experience which has been gained in such in work being done. I mean, here the roundtable sustainable palm oil, for example, is not of importance, but it would be. Yeah, how should I say? I mean, the work has been carried on for several years. Of course, it makes sense to use that knowledge and not to start the process all over again. And BSI is doing this work. You have the Roundtable Sustainable Biofuels. You have other initiatives ongoing. But then I think, and it's good that I've wrote down the questions. Otherwise, now I've been so distracted I would forget them. The other one was if criteria are too restrictive or too strict, wouldn't that be a disincentive? I suppose this is what I wanted to say with my final conclusion, that we need to find, and this I suppose we need to do together, that we need to find the right a balance of criteria. On the one hand, and this is what was being done during the political process within the European Union with proposal of Commission, Council and Parliament, there was a clear vocal request from European Union citizens that biofuels promotion in EU is not possible anymore without sustainability criteria. And then there was the clear discussion, we need to find the right balance of having the criteria not too strict in order not to disincentivize, but to strike the right balance. I'm happy to go more into detail, but I suppose I leave it with this. And to go to ILUC, indirect land use change. The discussion is ongoing. The Commission is carrying out work and is supposed to report towards Parliament and Council in March 2010. In the directive you will find the requirement to come forward with the report end of 2010. In order to have all the details on the table, the Commission obliged itself to do that already earlier. So we are quite entertained with that initiative at the moment. And there is no foreseen let's say, silver bullet methodology. There could be different ways, and as you're saying, the question is, and this, but there I can't give any statement at the moment, is whether certification is the right place for doing so, because obviously indirect land use change is a global issue, and probably not the right place to be tackled within that framework, but I can't give a more clear statement at the moment, just to say discussion is ongoing on that.
I think I will pick up on that of indirect land use change. We have a set of concerns here about the fairness of this discussion and of certification for biofuels. Why just biofuels? Are we just concerned about the sustainability of biofuels or of the rest of the production? What about agriculture? What about the rest of the renewable energies? And what about fossil energies? Coal, oil? How are we going to tackle these issues?
Is it again me?
One step at a time. And let's start with ours.
I think it's more for Alexandra and Nick, working more from the regulatory point of view.
Just to give you an Alexandra break, I think I'll take this one initially. I don't want to predict the future, but it's highly likely that when the UK implements the directive, the RFA will live up to its title of being a sustainable fuels regulator, and we'll be looking at putting in place mechanisms for assessing the sustainability of all sorts of fuels. Now, it's already bled into the broader agricultural domain that suddenly people are having to think about the questions about the sustainability of all grown processes, and for that matter, by association, all consumption patterns. As to whether we have a regulator that looks at all energy, now there's an interesting question, because you can imagine some would fail at the very first crude assessment. And the reality is, of course, how do we achieve a transition to where we need to be very quickly? The observation of one step at a time, I think, is very true. And it reminds me of, sometimes I hear the pain expressed by people about the scrutiny that biofuels is put under. I'm of the view that we should be quite comfortable with the scrutiny, because after all, if what we're doing is meant to be as sustainable as we believe it is, then it will stand up to that scrutiny, and it actually demonstrates that sustainability is not incompatible with good business. So therefore others can follow in the wake of that. Alexandra.
Thank you very much.
De nada.
This is about also my Portuguese knowledge so far. Thank you and welcome. This I tried also to briefly highlight on my last slide. Of course, as I very much agree with what Nick was saying, and while my microphone was stolen away from my right-hand side, also one step after another. Biofuels came under much scrutiny, as Nick was saying, in the European Union. We have the biofuels policy, we have the incentivization of biofuels in the European Union. I can just repeat again and again, there was this vocal request from European Union citizens. We can only go on if we show that biofuels are being produced in a sustainable way within the European Union and outside the European Union. But obviously, if we really want to make a difference, we have to go further than that. We can't stop at the with the scope of biofuels. We have to go further. Therefore, the next step would be, there we are already working on that, would be to move towards bioenergy in general. We are working on a proposal towards Council and Parliament, which should come out end of the year, on bioenergy as a whole. And of course, obviously, it would make sense to go even further to agriculture production in general. And then we have this this content-related scope, but then we have the geographical scope as well, that we have this for the European Union right now. Shouldn't we have a more broader scope? Shouldn't we have an international or global standard sustainability criteria? Yeah, I suppose that's it, and that would also help in tackling the indirect land use change issues. To come back to your question.
Sorry, Géraldine, if I may. On Friday last week, we held a workshop for BSI, a public consultation meeting in Geneva. And one of the interesting things that came out of that was with regards to land use change. And there was an overwhelming sort of wave, tsunami even, of opinion that wouldn't it be great if we had just a global standard for land use change, irrespective of the commodity, the product, etc. And it would be fantastic for all of us sitting in this room, because it just gets the problem and takes it to a high level, and we all have to salute and agree. The reality of the situation is that isn't going to happen. I mean, we can't even agree on which forces are going to go to which country to save which people for whatever reason. So trying to get that sort of global panacea agreement on land use isn't going to happen. So therefore we have to bring it back to the practical. And the practical for us here with regards to sugarcane is about biofuels as it pertains to sugarcane land use. And for soya, it'll be essentially the same. So that's the reality of the situation, and I think it's much better for us all to try and concentrate on solving issues that we can solve and that we can get our hands around in the world we live in, rather than trying to solve the problems for everyone else as well. So I would recommend we try and solve our land use problems if we can within sugarcane, and soya can do the same for their products.
Great. It's better, right? Moving on with the debate, it's clear that biofuels are competing in a market environment, thank you, which is not free. We have regulations, clearly. We have legal requirements for sustainability that other products don't have to comply with. So financial compensation, I agree, Daudi, is essential. I think it's clear that from the legal point of view, you won't have any specific compensation for biofuels. Some member states in the European Union will give some tax incentives, but you will never have a unified and harmonized policy in the EU just because this is just the competence of each member state. So maybe through voluntary schemes, you could get some financial compensation. This is especially important because every producer will ask itself, what will I gain from getting certified? What the competitiveness of my product I will get with this certification? And for least developed countries, they will need probably some compensation to help them to get to those best management practices, or for producers maybe to preserve the sensitive environmental areas that are mentioned in the legislation. So from a voluntary perspective, Daudi, maybe you could tell us what kind of mechanism could be put in place to give some financial compensation, and maybe, Rosemary, you could complement with, based on your practical experience on this, especially when we think about certification for ethanol under the EU directive, where we have to use a mass balance system that do not authorize the trade of certificate under a book and claim system.
Thank you, Géraldine. Or thank you for whoever asked the question. The reality of the real answer is we don't know yet. But let me try and present the vision. Certification is clearly the most practical way of trying to raise dollars. And the vision of BSI is to have a standard which can then be audited, against which certificates would be issued, and those certificates are then tradable. If you ask me how if you were to ask me exactly which methodology might be used, I don't know. We're not there yet. The membership hasn't even been able to discuss that in terms of book and claim, mass balance, etc. It's likely to be a composium, depending on which the product is. But will the certificate work? I mean, that's, I think, the question you're really asking, because if we look at the world today and look at some of the certification schemes that are out there, CO2 certification, palm oil certification, I mean, there's no great track record. But they're short of another alternative of creating value. Certification would seem to be the one that is most globally implementable. Now, if you ask me on a real one-to-one perspective, I've seen trades go through for sustainable raw sugar to Finland that have adopted a $40 premium per ton. We've seen other such trades. Now, are they unique? Yeah, they're a bit small at the moment, but they are happening. People are starting to demand it. So there is real money. I'll tell you what my biggest issue is how the hell do you get that money away from Cargills and EDF Mans and BPs of this world and back to the people that actually basically end up with the cost of deriving that certified product or that sustainable product? And for me, that's a bigger issue. And again, certification helps a little bit towards that, because you wouldn't give the trade houses the certificate. You would give the certificate to the mill, or you would give, ideally, to the farmer, but that I see is going to have issues, but certainly to the mill. And so certification is the only answer that I have, or that I can see, that's actually practical and manageable and implementable on a global basis.